Hello YouTube! First generation of Core i processors was quite a success. With a distinct product hierarchy. It made it easy for customers to decide which performance level they wanted. It also introduced a hyper-threading to their quad-cores, making first 8-threaded consumer CPUs. Intel introduced further improvements with Sandy Bridge going down with the process node and introducing new instruction sets. Has that been enough to future-proof the second gen of i7s for the years to come? Well, we're about to find out today. So, as usual, let's hop over the technical specs of today's guest. We are looking at 4 cores, 8 threads made in 32nm node. Those have a base clock of 3.4 GHz with a maximum turbo boost of 3.8. However, for all core loads it's only a 100 MHz boost, which isn't a lot. The integrated memory controller on the chip provides us with rated support for dual-channel DDR3 with up to 32 GB running at 1333 MHz. There is 256 KB of L2 cache per each core and 8 MB of L3 cache shared. The part has built-in Intel HD 2000 integrated graphics, which, while nothing special, is better than nothing. However, we won't look at them today. It was released for an MSRP of $294 back in January of 2011, where back around that time it was simply the best locked CPU on the consumer market. It has TDP of 95 watts, so nothing crazy, but not super efficient either. Back on release and for quite a few years, it was an amazing CPU. Did not fall behind significantly in performance for a long while as well, and became quite a great choice for gamers on the budget over the years. Thanks to 4 cores and the hyper-threading, it was very future-proof. While it was significantly faster than AMD mustered at the time, now it's more of trading blows with it, and even fallen ever so slightly in compatibility regards due to missing some instruction sets. However, main stuff like AVX1 is here, so it should still run most of the games we want without too many problems. We are running it in a C77 board from MSI, 16GB of DDR3 RAM. Thanks to the Z series board, we have 2 advantages on our hands, one being Turbo Boost Overdrive. On second and third generation you could override the boost by additional 4 multiplier points, so today we end up with all-core boost of 3.9 GHz. However, weirdly the CPU did not hold that boost fully, dropping to 3.8 and 3.7 GHz depending on the task, due to power limits I think, despite not really hitting those power limit ceilings. Additionally, we can run the RAM past its rated speed, getting up to 1866 MHz with CL9 timings, as 2133 was not stable. The stock results are stock turbo with 1600 MHz RAM, and the before mentioned perks will be the overclocked results. Generating graphics will be taken care of by the resident RTX 3070, while not super fast nowadays, it will do for our testing. All tests are done in 1080p unless stated otherwise. So let's get right into it. Our games are starting as usual with Counter-Strike 2, running with low settings and high shadows with dynamic shadows enabled. The CPU achieves 160.6 FPS average with 86.8 FPS 1% low on stock settings, while the overclock gets us a solid improvement to the tune of 15% with the average now being 183.4 FPS. The 1% is virtually unchanged, but that's nothing bad, it still provides a great time in this game. These kind of figures are okay for even some competitive play. Red Dead Redemption 2 up next, and here I'm kinda disappointed seeing we didn't really get any significant changes with the overclock. But let's start from the beginning. We set the quality slider set to halfway, and that rewards us with a very playable stock experience with almost 52 FPS on average with lows over 30 FPS. The overclock, as mentioned, doesn't show much improvement at all, actually a bit of regress, but that's I would say within margin of error. All in all, very playable still, and I would much rather have old CPU rather than old GPU comparing the results with the last week's 680 result. Fortnite showed decent performance as well with low settings and epic view distance using the performance renderer. This got us an average just shy of 110 FPS with great lows. Overclock does help us to almost 20% improvement as well, with the average landing at 128.7 FPS lows. Do see a tiny increase as well, but nothing to write home about. And here actually the 680 would have done better with a newer CPU rather than an old CPU with a good GPU. I guess you win some, you lose some. Warthunder, as always, shows decent numbers no matter what. Here we were able to crank it up to a movie preset and it still ran rather well with 126 FPS average with decent lows. The 0.1% are mostly dictated by the small few stutters after loading in the map. They were not ever present like fully throughout the game. Overclock is mostly just as a guide for a less demanding map since they can't really be compared like for like. 160 FPS was the average there. Cyberpunk 2077 ran quite decently too, actually much better than I would have thought. We have used the medium RT preset and despite that i7 actually held up its end of the bargain quite well, especially overclocked. However, first things first, the stock result is 36.9 FPS average with 1% low of 21.9, quite decent. Overclock brings it up all the way to 43.2 FPS average with 23.5 FPS 1% low. Really great stuff and shows that in some scenarios it can still really be impressive. Clair Obscure Expedition 33 runs quite well too, despite being one of the newest titles on the list. We get the low preset looking nicely with 35.6 FPS average with lows comfortably above 20 for a slower but consistent experience. The overclock chucks in another 5 FPS into our average with lows rising by a few percent to tighten up the experience, so that's quite a good result for our i7. HELLDIVERS 2 also ran in a fantastic way. We were able to crank the preset up to the ultra settings. This still got us a very smooth 58.4 FPS average with lows that were not too shabby. Overclock just improves it further with the average crossing the magical 60 FPS line, more than okay for this game. However, keep in mind those are the starter missions, so it might get a bit tougher in the late game. Nearing the end now with Dying Light the Beast, and that shows us something weird. The average is great, it's over 70 for both stock and overclock results using the medium preset, but strangely the 0.1% lows are what's kinda detracting from the experience. In my FX vs i5 video I thought that it is because of the lack of threading of the i5 these are so low, seeing as the 8-core FX didn't have that problem. But the i7 does have the same amount of logical threads, yet it does not achieve a better low. Weird, but I guess it may be down to some extension work then. Forza Horizon 6 did not throw any tantrums when running it as it saw all the required cores, which is great. It ran in medium preset, and before we get into the numbers, I just wanted to say it worked properly and rendered everything as it should, which may sound obvious, but sadly the 4-threaded i5 did have issues with it. The stock results in the end was 40 FPS average with lows around 30, and the overclock pushes those averages into 50 FPS and improves the 0.1% slightly as well. Our last game shows that the i7s of the yesteryear are really aging. Gothic Remake using low preset ran with playable results, but they were not fantastic or amazing really. These were 34.5 FPS on average with 1% low below 10 FPS, indicating quite often slowdowns. These were quite improved after overclocking though, where we see average soaring to 40 FPS with the 1% low up to over 20, but those still smaller stutters were there, not disappearing fully. As usual, let's run ourselves through the synthetic benchmarks as well. Heaven gets us 5,272 points, while stock, with the overclock getting us a small boost up to 5,652 points, which is quite a nice, albeit modest, improvement. Superposition delivers around 8,700 points for both results, and that is quite an okay result. I would be worried if it didn't max the RTX 3070 here. 3D Mark Firestrike shows a decent result as well with 8,763 points stock, and a decent improvement with the overclock to almost 9,100 points. Lastly, we have 3D Mark Timespy, and that gets us a stock result of 3,080 points, and overclock improves things by around 5% to 3,232 points. As an interesting side note, an overclocked 8350 actually got almost 3,700 points here, which is quite a difference. What about emulation? Well, with PS2 the i7 handles it perfectly. We have God of War 2 scaled up 5 times on the PCSX2 emulator, and it still gets fantastic rock solid frame rate and allows us to play games no problem. When it comes to Xenia and Xbox 360 by extension, it will probably be a mixed bag. The test game of ours, which is Forza Horizon 2, gets a black screen when loading into save. The same thing actually happened with the i5 3570. I did a bit of digging and it seems this is because we are missing some extensions to the FMA instruction sets, which were only introduced with Haswell, so we are out of luck here. Dolphin on the other hand worked flawlessly, 6 times scaled up Zelda Twilight Princess with 2 times multi-sampling anti-aliasing, and we are seeing no slowdowns or really any problems with the gameplay. So well, that's the performance of the 2nd gen i7 in 2026. What do I think of it? Well, it's quite commendable. The fact that it held on for so long can only get that commendation really. These CPUs are legendary due to the mentioned sentiment from the long-time users. Many gamers had them and it helps that. It is, however, being hampered by its rather low clock speeds and slow memory. If we were able to hold the turbo fully to 3.9 GHz, I'm sure it would be able to eke out a few more percents here and there. With additional few hundred megahertz on top of that, it would have done even better. Sadly, for that we would need the K variant, and these do hold their value much more. And in my honest opinion, at that point, you're better off with other options. On the topic of those options and recommendations, should you get one? Well, it depends. If you ask me, I would say it depends on the price. If it's super cheap, why not? It gets decent FPS in most games, has enough compatibility to run them, and you can really get a lot of enjoyment out of it. However, if you have a little bit extra budget and you need to stay on DDR3 memory, swing for the Haswell or Devil Canyon for the LGA 1150. i7 or Xeon counterpart. Performance will be similar, but you will get full UEFI support, better compatibility, faster RAM support, as well as other creature comforts, possibly even M.2, which are quite a big thing to have if you build a modern system. Most of those Sandy Bridge boards sadly do not have those, so it is a bit of a trade-off here. It is a shame to see it does start to age worse and worse as time goes on, and seeing its performance today really does mess with my memories of its performance, but as they say, never meet your heroes. Well, on that note, I think it's time to end. This was all I have prepared for us today. If you've rocked the i7 of the generation or maybe something newer of the i7s, please let me know what's your experience with it. I really want to know. And thank you kindly for watching. I'm hoping to see you in the next week in another video. Goodbye.